I never thought I would have to fight for my birthright from a hospital bed. At 32, while battling an aggressive form of lymphoma, I watched through a video call as my sister convinced our board of directors that I was no longer fit to lead Reynolds Pharmaceutical. The company our grandfather built from nothing, the legacy our father entrusted to me, all of it nearly slipped away during my darkest hours. But sometimes, the truth has a way of emerging exactly when you need it most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Reynolds, and until 6 months ago, I served as the CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceutical, one of the largest independent pharmaceutical companies in the Northeast. Our grandfather started the company in his garage, developing a revolutionary drug delivery system that changed how patients received critical medications. My father expanded it into a full-scale pharmaceutical development company, and when he stepped down 3 years ago, he chose me to carry on the legacy, much to my sister Elizabeth's displeasure. The corner office on the 42nd floor had been my second home since I was a child. I would sit at my father's desk after school, doing homework while he attended board meetings, learning the rhythm of corporate life before I could even spell pharmaceutical. Elizabeth preferred the glamour of medical conferences and industry, galas, showing up for the publicity photos but leaving the actual work to others. Still, we made it work. I handled operations and research development. She managed public relations and investor relations. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. Had always been methodical in my approach to running the company. Where Elizabeth saw opportunities for quick profits and flashy headlines, I focused on sustainable growth and research integrity. Under my leadership, we increased our research and development budget by 40%, launched 2 successful drug trials, and maintained our reputation for ethical pharmaceutical development. Our stock price reflected steady, reliable growth rather than dramatic spikes and crashes. The first signs of trouble came during a routine physical last spring. The doctor found enlarged lymph nodes, ordered additional tests, and suddenly I was facing a diagnosis that would change everything. Stage 3 lymphoma. The treatment plan was aggressive. 6 months of intensive chemotherapy followed by targeted radiation. My oncologist assured me I had good chances for a full recovery, but the immediate future would be challenging. I developed a detailed transition plan, intending to temporarily step back while maintaining oversight of major decisions. The board agreed. Elizabeth was to step in as interim CEO, and I would continue participating in key meetings virtually when my health permitted. It seemed like a reasonable arrangement that would protect both the company's interests and my recovery. The first few weeks went according to plan. Despite the brutal effects of chemotherapy, I managed to review quarterly reports and attend virtual board meetings. Elizabeth seemed to be handling the day-to-day operations competently, though I noticed a shift in our research priorities toward more commercially promising but less scientifically rigorous projects. Then came the turning point. During my 3rd month of treatment, when the side effects were at their worst, Elizabeth called an emergency board meeting. I logged in from my hospital room, still weak from the latest round of chemotherapy, to find her standing at the head of the boardroom table, impeccably dressed in our father's favorite power suit. "Members of the board," she began, her voice carrying that familiar smooth confidence. "I know this is difficult, but we need to discuss Catherine's future with the company. Her illness has left us vulnerable at a crucial time in our industry. We cannot afford to have uncertain leadership." I watched through the screen as she presented a compelling case for my permanent removal as CEO. She had charts showing slight dips in our stock price, carefully selected emails where my response time had lagged due to treatments, and a medical expert who spoke about the cognitive effects of chemotherapy and the low probability of full recovery to executive function. "It pains me to say this," she concluded, dabbing at apparently emotional eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, "but as someone who loves both this company and my sister, I believe we need to act decisively. Catherine needs to focus on her health, and Reynolds Pharmaceutical needs stable leadership. I propose a permanent transition of power, effective immediately." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. These were people who had known me since childhood, who had watched me grow from the little girl doing homework in her father's office to the executive who had successfully led the company for 3 years. But Elizabeth's presentation was persuasive, playing on their fears about market stability and corporate governance. I tried to speak up, to defend my position, but my voice was weak from the treatments. The video call format made it even harder to command attention. I watched helplessly as Elizabeth continued to build her case, wondering if everything I had worked for was about to slip away while I lay tethered to an IV drip, too weak to fight back effectively. What I didn't know then was that this moment, this apparent lowest point, would actually become the catalyst for something much bigger. Sometimes you have to lose everything, or come very close to it, to discover what you're truly capable of. The board meeting that day didn't end the way Elizabeth expected. In fact, it was just the beginning of a story that would reshape not just our company, but our entire family's legacy. To understand how we reached this critical moment, you need to know more about Reynolds Pharmaceutical and the complicated dynamics that shaped our family business. Our grandfather, James Reynolds, started the company in 1962 with nothing but a laboratory in his garage and an innovative idea about drug delivery systems. He had worked as a research pharmacist for one of the major pharmaceutical companies, but they repeatedly dismissed his proposals for a new type of time-release medication capsule. The story of his breakthrough became family legend. After another long day of rejection, he came home to find his wife, our grandmother Margaret, struggling to remember when to take her various heart medications. The complex schedule of different pills at different times was overwhelming her. That night, he sketched out the initial design for what would become the Reynolds timed release system, a revolutionary approach that would allow multiple doses to be contained in a single capsule, releasing at precisely timed intervals. The early years were lean. Grandfather remortgaged their house twice, and grandmother took on extra nursing shifts to keep the research going. But his persistence paid off. By 1970, Reynolds Pharmaceutical had its first patent, and by 1975, major hospitals across the country were using our delivery system. The garage laboratory became a proper research facility, then a campus of buildings, each expansion funded by new innovations and achievements. My father, William Reynolds, joined the company fresh out of business school in 1985. He brought a different kind of innovation, not in pharmaceuticals, but in business strategy. He saw the potential to expand beyond drug delivery systems into full pharmaceutical development. Under his leadership, Reynolds Pharmaceutical grew from a successful regional company into a national player in the pharmaceutical industry. Elizabeth and I grew up watching this expansion. Our childhood memories are filled with visits to the research facilities, dinner table conversations about clinical trials and FDA approvals, and frequent reminders about the responsibility that came with the Reynolds name. But we processed these lessons very differently. I inherited our grandfather's fascination with the science itself. My teenage years were spent in summer internships in our research labs, learning from our senior scientists. I pursued a double major in biochemistry and business administration, determined to understand both the scientific and commercial aspects of pharmaceutical development. Elizabeth, 3 years my senior, focused solely on business administration, with a minor in public relations. She had our father's gift for commanding attention, but none of his patience for the methodical pace of pharmaceutical development. The first real tension between us emerged during my senior year of college. I had just completed a research project that identified a potential new application for our delivery system in cancer treatments. Elizabeth, newly appointed as our Director of Public Relations, wanted to announce it immediately to boost our stock price. I insisted we needed more testing first. Our father sided with me, and Elizabeth didn't speak to me for weeks. This pattern continued as we both rose through the company ranks. I focused on building our research capabilities, establishing new protocols for clinical trials, and maintaining the scientific integrity that had made our grandfather's reputation. Elizabeth excelled at presenting our successes to the world, but she increasingly pushed for shortcuts that would accelerate our time to market. During the last conversation I had with our father before he stepped down as CEO, he explained his decision to choose me as his successor. Elizabeth sees the business as a way to make money, he said, looking out over the research campus from his office window. You see it the way your grandfather did, as a way to help people. The money follows when you get that part right. Elizabeth was livid when the announcement was made. She had assumed that as the older sibling, she would naturally inherit the leadership position. The board meeting where our father announced his decision remains vivid in my memory. Elizabeth sat perfectly still, her face a mask of composure, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the armrests of her chair. Only those who knew her well would have recognized the rage beneath her polished exterior. To her credit, she didn't quit as many expected. Instead, she threw herself into her role as Chief Communications Officer with renewed intensity. She expanded. Our public relations department cultivated relationships with key industry journalists and became the public face of Reynolds Pharmaceutical. Our arrangement worked because we each had our distinct spheres of influence. I handled the operational and research decisions, while she managed our public image. At least, that's how it worked until my diagnosis changed everything. Looking back now, I realize I should have seen the signs earlier. The way she began cultivating individual board members, the subtle suggestions that my focus on research was hurting our bottom line, the increasing pressure to prioritize quick-to-market products over more promising but longer-term research projects. She wasn't just building her public relations empire, she was laying the groundwork for a takeover. What I couldn't have anticipated was how she would use my illness as the ultimate leverage. In business school, they teach you about hostile takeovers, proxy battles, and shareholder revolts. They don't teach you how to defend your position when your own sister uses your fight for survival as a weapon against you. But sometimes the most important business lessons come from places no textbook can prepare you for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first round of chemotherapy coincided with our most promising drug trial in years. Our research team had developed a novel treatment for autoimmune disorders, and preliminary results showed unprecedented efficacy with minimal side effects. As I sat in the oncology ward watching clear liquid drip into my veins, I reviewed the trial data on my laptop. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a pharmaceutical executive, experiencing firsthand the vital importance of the work we did. Despite my medical team's insistence that I focus solely on recovery, I couldn't completely step away from the company. This trial represented everything I had worked for. A potentially transformative treatment that could help millions of patients. More importantly, it embodied our grandfather's vision of putting patient care before profit. The development costs had been substantial, and Elizabeth had opposed the project from the start, arguing that rare disease treatments offered better profit margins. Dr. Sarah Chen, our head of research and development, had been sending me daily updates on the trial's progress. The 6-month data is exceeding our projections, she wrote in one email. If these results hold through the final phase, this could be the breakthrough we've been working toward. She also included a personal note. Take care of yourself, Catherine. We've got things handled here. I should have paid more attention to the subtle shift in tone of her subsequent emails. They became shorter, less detailed, with increasing mentions of Elizabeth's concerns and new priorities. At the time, I attributed the change to my own fatigue. Chemotherapy has a way of making everything feel slightly off-kilter, like watching The world through a warped lens. The first clear warning sign came during a video call with our chief financial officer, Michael Torres. He had been with Reynolds Pharmaceutical for 20 years, starting as a junior accountant during my father's tenure. "Elizabeth has been making some interesting moves," he said carefully, his expression guarded even through the pixelated video feed. "She's reallocated significant resources from the autoimmune trial to a new cosmetic dermatology division." "She can't do that," I protested, sitting up straighter in my hospital bed. "Those allocations were approved by the board for the full duration of the trial." The movement made my head spin, a reminder of how the treatments were affecting me. "Technically, as interim CEO, she has some discretionary power over resource allocation," Michael explained. "She's presenting it as a temporary measure to boost quarterly profits. The market's been jittery about your absence, and she argues, we need some quick wins to stabilize investor confidence." I began noticing other changes too. Press releases I hadn't approved were going out, announcing new strategic initiatives and market-focused reorganization. Elizabeth had always been skilled at using corporate euphemisms to mask significant changes. To the casual observer, these announcements might have seemed like routine business updates, but I recognized them for what they were: systematic dismantling of the long-term research projects I had championed. Dr. Chen's next update confirmed my fears. "They're cutting our research staff by 30%, she wrote. "Elizabeth says it's temporary, just until you're back, but they're already moving people to the new dermatology projects. Catherine, some of these people have been working on the autoimmune treatment for years. We can't just pause their work and expect to pick up where we left off." I tried calling an emergency board meeting from my hospital room, but Elizabeth had anticipated this move. "The board is concerned about your stress levels during recovery," came the response from our legal department. "All non-essential communications should go through the interim CEO's office to protect your health." She had effectively created a barrier between me and the board, filtering all information through her perspective. The situation reached a critical point when I received an unmarked envelope at the hospital. Inside was a detailed report showing how Elizabeth had been systematically redirecting research funds, not just to dermatology projects, but to a network of smaller companies, all recently acquired by a holding company registered in her name. She wasn't just changing the company's direction. She was setting up a parallel power structure that would give her permanent control. That night, as I lay awake listening to the quiet beeping of hospital monitors, I made a decision. If Elizabeth wanted to play hardball, she would learn that being confined to a hospital bed didn't make me powerless. I might have been physically weak, but my mind was sharp, and more importantly, I had something she had always underestimated: a lifetime of relationships with people who shared my grandfather's vision for the company. I reached for my phone and sent a text to Michael. "I need you to compile something for me. Everything that's happened since I stepped back. Every decision, every reallocation, every new project. Leave no stone unturned." Then I sent another message to Dr. Chen. "Keep detailed records of all research changes. We're going to need them." The response from both was immediate and identical. "Already done." Even in my weakened state, I smiled. Elizabeth wasn't the only one who knew how to prepare for a corporate battle. She might have had the temporary advantage of health and physical presence, but I had spent my entire career building trust and loyalty. It was time to remind everyone, including my sister, why our father had chosen me to lead Reynolds Pharmaceutical. The chemotherapy ward became my unofficial command center. Between treatments, I began methodically documenting everything happening at Reynolds Pharmaceutical. My oncologist, Dr. Martinez, would often find me surrounded by financial reports and corporate documents during his morning rounds. "This isn't exactly what I meant by rest and recovery," he'd say, but there was understanding in his eyes. As a doctor, he knew the importance of the research we conducted, and as someone who had worked with pharmaceutical companies for decades, he understood the stakes involved. What emerged from my investigation was deeply troubling. Elizabeth hadn't just been redirecting resources, she had been systematically undermining our core research initiatives. The autoimmune treatment trial, our most promising project, had been effectively gutted. The research team had been reduced to a skeleton crew, and critical long-term studies were being temporarily suspended due to resource optimization needs. Michael Torres proved invaluable during this time. As CFO, he had access to every financial transaction, and he began sending me detailed analyses of fund movements disguised as routine financial updates. The pattern was clear. Elizabeth was shifting millions in research funding to quick-return projects while simultaneously building a network of shell companies that would give her personal control over our most valuable intellectual property. "She's been laying this groundwork for months," Michael explained during one of our secure video calls. "Even before your diagnosis, she was setting up these auxiliary companies. The illness just accelerated her timeline." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "There's something else. She's been meeting privately with board members, one-on-one. Dr. Williams mentioned she's been raising concerns about cognitive impacts from your treatment affecting your judgment." This news hit me harder than any chemotherapy side effect. Dr. James Williams had been on our board since my grandfather's time. He had known me since I was a child running through the company hallways. The fact that Elizabeth could make him doubt my competence showed just how effectively she was playing this game. Dr. Chen's updates from the research division were equally concerning. "They're pushing us to redirect our focus to cosmetic applications," she reported. "Elizabeth's team is arguing that we can repurpose our delivery system for anti-aging compounds. The profit margins would be higher, but—" She trailed off, her frustration evident. "But it's not what we do," I finished for her. Reynolds Pharmaceutical had never been about chasing quick profits through cosmetic products. Our mission had always been to develop treatments that saved and improved lives. The delivery system that had launched our company had revolutionized how patients received critical medications. Using it for wrinkle cream felt like a betrayal of everything we stood for. One afternoon, as I was reviewing these reports, my nurse Jessica came in for my regular vital check. She noticed the documents spread across my bed. "You know," she said while taking my blood pressure, "I've been giving these medications for 15 years. The Reynolds time-release system changed everything for us. Before that, we had to wake patients up multiple times during the night for doses. Now one capsule does the work of 4 or 5 separate medications." She smiled, adjusting my IV line. "My mother takes your heart medication, the one that only needs 1 dose per day. It's made such a difference in her life." Her words reminded me exactly what we were fighting for. This wasn't just about corporate control or family legacy. It was about the millions of patients who relied on our research and innovations. Elizabeth saw profit margins and market capitalizations, but I saw Jessica's mother and countless others who depended on us doing the right thing. That evening, I received an unexpected visit from Linda Martinez, our head of legal affairs. She came after visiting hours, having convinced the hospital staff that she needed to review urgent corporate documents with me. Once the door was closed, she revealed the real reason for her visit. "Elizabeth's preparing to call an emergency board meeting," she said quietly, glancing at the door. "She's going to propose a permanent leadership transition. She's gathered medical opinions suggesting that the aggressive nature of your treatment makes it unlikely you'll be able to return to full-time leadership in the foreseeable future." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my treatment. "She can't do that without my participation in the meeting." Linda's expression was grim. "Actually, she can. There's a provision in the corporate bylaws allowing for emergency succession in cases of medical incapacity. It was put in place after your grandfather's heart attack in '89. Elizabeth's lawyers have been reviewing it extensively. For the first Time since my diagnosis, I felt truly afraid. Not of the cancer. My prognosis was actually quite good, but of losing everything my family had built. Elizabeth wasn't just trying to take control. She was trying to erase our grandfather's legacy, turning Reynolds Pharmaceutical from a research-focused pharmaceutical company into just another profit-driven corporation. As Linda prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. "Catherine, there's something else you should know. The board members, they're not all convinced. Dr. Williams especially. He remembers your grandfather. He's uncomfortable with how this is being handled. If you can show them you're still capable of leading, still connected to the company's mission." She left the thought unfinished, but her meaning was clear. I spent that night thinking about everything. Our grandfather's garage laboratory, our father's careful stewardship of the company, the patients whose lives we'd improved. By morning, I had a plan. Elizabeth might have the legal machinery on her side, but I had something more powerful. The truth about who we were and what Reynolds Pharmaceutical really stood for. The board meeting wouldn't just be about my leadership, it would be about the soul of our company. The morning of the preliminary board meeting arrived with a sense of foreboding. Elizabeth had scheduled it strategically, knowing it coincided with my third round of chemotherapy. She clearly expected me to be too weak to participate effectively. What she hadn't counted on was Dr. Martinez adjusting my treatment schedule by a few hours to ensure I would be at my most alert during the virtual meeting. I had prepared meticulously for this moment. My hospital room had been transformed into a makeshift office, with my laptop positioned perfectly and a professional backdrop arranged behind my bed. The medical equipment was carefully placed out of camera view. I had even convinced Jessica, my nurse, to help me with light makeup to counter the pallor that chemotherapy had given my skin. The goal wasn't to hide my illness, but to demonstrate that I remained fully capable of leading the company. Michael Torres had arrived early to the boardroom, positioning his laptop so I could see most of the participants. One by one, they filed in. Dr. Williams, his face grave with concern. Amanda Chen from our research division. Robert Nash, representing our largest institutional investors. And finally, Elizabeth, immaculate in a designer suit, her expression carefully neutral as she took her place at the head of the table. "Before we begin," Elizabeth started, her voice carrying that practiced note of concern, "I want to acknowledge how difficult this meeting must be for everyone, especially Catherine. Your health should be your primary focus right now, dear sister." I could feel the trap in her words. If I agreed, I would be admitting to diminished capacity. If I protested too strongly, I would appear defensive and possibly unstable. Instead, I chose a different approach. "Thank you for your concern, Elizabeth," I replied calmly. "Since my health is on everyone's mind, let me address it directly. My prognosis is excellent, with an 85% chance of complete remission. My cognitive functions are entirely unaffected by the treatment, as my oncologist, Dr. Martinez, has documented." I gestured to the medical reports I had already shared with the board. Elizabeth's smile tightened slightly. "Nevertheless, the demands of running a pharmaceutical company of this size are precisely why I've implemented a robust interim management structure," I interrupted smoothly. "Which brings us to the actual reason I called this meeting." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Elizabeth's composure slipped for just a moment. "I believe I called this meeting," she said. "Actually," Michael interjected, right on cue, "Catherine submitted the request first, by 12 hours. He slid a document across the table, timestamp clearly visible. I leaned forward slightly. In my hospital bed. "Board members, I've asked you here today not to discuss my health, but to address serious concerns about the company's direction during my temporary medical leave. Dr. Chen, would you please share the latest data from our autoimmune treatment? Trials?" Dr. Chen stood, clicking through a presentation that showed the devastating impact of Elizabeth's resource reallocation. The promising trial results had plateaued due to reduced funding and staff cuts. Potential breakthrough treatments were being delayed or abandoned. This represents more than lost research opportunities, I continued. These are patients waiting for treatments that could change their lives. This is our grandfather's legacy, being dismantled for quick profits. Elizabeth recovered quickly. The market demands adaptation, she argued smoothly. Our cosmetic division projections show potential revenues that would dwarf these specialized treatments. Interesting you should mention the cosmetic division, I said. With perfect timing, Michael distributed another set of documents. These records show the connection between our new cosmetic research initiatives and a network of companies recently established under your personal control. The room went silent. Dr. Williams picked up the documents, his hands trembling slightly as he read. Elizabeth's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. These allocations were all properly documented, she insisted. Everything was done according to corporate procedure. The procedures, yes, I acknowledged, but not the spirit of our company's mission. Not the principles our grandfather established, which Dad reinforced, and which I swore to uphold. I turned to address each board member directly through the camera. Reynolds Pharmaceutical has never been solely about profits. We exist to improve lives through medical innovation. That's what built this company, and that's what will secure our future. The mood in the boardroom had shifted palpably. Elizabeth must have sensed it too, because she changed tactics. Catherine, she said, her voice taking on a concerned, almost patronizing tone. You're clearly passionate about this. But passion doesn't run a company. The stress of your condition is affecting your judgment. These conspiracy theories about my business decisions are documented in detail, Michael interrupted, producing yet another file. Including recordings of your meetings with external partners where you discussed, and I quote, leveraging Catherine's medical crisis to implement permanent leadership changes. The color drained from Elizabeth's face. She hadn't known about the recordings. In her arrogance, she had assumed that everyone would simply fall in line with her plans. She hadn't counted on the loyalty of people like Michael, who had quietly gathered evidence while playing along with her schemes. Dr. Williams cleared his throat. I believe, he said slowly, we need to table the discussion of permanent leadership changes. Instead, we should focus on reviewing these allegations of fund misappropriation and conflict of interest. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a crucial first step. Elizabeth's careful plans had been exposed, and more importantly, the board had been reminded of what Reynolds Pharmaceutical truly stood for. As the meeting concluded, I caught a glimpse of my sister's face on the video feed. The mask of concerned sisterly love had vanished, replaced by something harder and colder. This battle was far from over, but I had won the first round. Later, that evening, as Jessica adjusted my IV, she asked how the meeting had gone. Let's just say, I replied, that sometimes the best medicine isn't in these bags. Sometimes it's in standing up for what's right, even when you're at your weakest. The aftermath of the board meeting brought both victories and new challenges. The next morning, while the nurses were changing my IV bags, I received an urgent message from Linda in legal affairs. The board had frozen all major organizational changes pending a full investigation of Elizabeth's activities. It was a significant win, but what Linda said next made my heart sink. Elizabeth's not taking it well, she reported. She's been in her office since dawn, making calls to our major shareholders. The story she's spinning, Catherine, she's telling them that your illness has made you paranoid, that you're seeing conspiracies where there are only standard business decisions. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar wave of chemotherapy-induced fatigue washing over me. Elizabeth had always been skilled at manipulating narratives. It was what made her so effective in public relations. Now she was using that talent to undermine not just my leadership, but my credibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Reuters is requesting comment on leadership instability at Reynolds. Elizabeth's PR team has been busy. Attached was a draft article that painted me as an obstinate leader, refusing to accept necessary modernization of the company while battling serious health issues. The piece quoted anonymous sources close to the situation, expressing concerns about my ability to separate personal health challenges from professional decisions. It was a masterful piece of misdirection. Elizabeth had taken the very evidence we'd presented against her and reframed it as proof of my supposed instability. Every documented instance of her interference with research projects was presented as necessary restructuring that I was emotionally unable to accept due to my condition. As I pondered our next move, Dr. Martinez came in for his morning rounds. He found me surrounded by newspaper articles and shareholder reports. "You know," he said, checking my vitals, "in medicine, we sometimes have to let infections come to the surface before we can treat them effectively. Hidden problems are often the most dangerous ones." His words struck a chord. We had exposed Elizabeth's schemes in the board meeting, but perhaps that wasn't enough. Perhaps we needed to let her actions become more visible to treat the underlying problem effectively. I reached for my phone and called Dr. Chen. "How would you feel about giving a presentation to our major shareholders?" I asked. "Not about the corporate politics, about the science, about the patients waiting for our treatments." There was a pause on the other end. "The trial results for the autoimmune treatment, they're compelling," she said slowly. "And we've been documenting every delay caused by the funding cuts. The human cost is significant." "Exactly," I replied. "Elizabeth wants to make this about leadership struggles and modernization. Let's make it about what really matters: our mission and the people we serve." Over the next few days, while continuing my treatments, I worked with Dr. Chen and our research team to prepare a comprehensive presentation. We gathered testimonials from patients in our trials, documented the potential impact of our research pipeline, and calculated the real-world implications of diverting resources to cosmetic products. Elizabeth, meanwhile, had launched a full-scale PR campaign. Press releases emphasized the need for dynamic leadership and market-responsive strategies. She gave interviews about the challenges of balancing family loyalty with corporate responsibility. Each statement was carefully crafted to make her appear as the responsible steward, forced to make difficult decisions. But she had overlooked something crucial: the people who actually did the work. As news of the power struggle spread through the company, researchers, lab technicians, and project managers began speaking up. They shared stories about critical projects being defunded, about years of research threatened by sudden budget cuts, about promising treatments delayed or abandoned. Dr. Williams, our longest-serving board member, proved to be an unexpected ally. He began reaching out to his extensive network in the pharmaceutical industry, sharing his concerns about the company's shifting priorities. His reputation for integrity carried significant weight. The turning point came during a video call with our research teams. I had asked them to share their current projects, not for corporate presentations, but simply to remind everyone what we were fighting for. One young researcher, David Kim, spoke about a patient in our autoimmune trial. "She's a 12-year-old girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Before our treatment, she could barely get out of bed. Now she's back in school, playing with her friends. We have dozens of patients like her. These aren't just data points on a spreadsheet. These are real people whose lives were changing." The video of that call, initially intended for internal use only, found its way to several major medical journals. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about corporate leadership struggles anymore. It was about the fundamental purpose of pharmaceutical research: to help people in need. As I watched the story evolve, I remembered something our grandfather used to say. In business, like in medicine, the truth eventually comes out. You can mask symptoms for a while, but you can't change the underlying reality. Elizabeth had tried to frame this as a story about an ailing CEO unable to adapt to modern business realities. Instead, it was becoming a story about the soul of the pharmaceutical industry itself, about choosing between quick profits and meaningful research, between shareholder returns and patient care. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt truly energized. Sometimes fighting for something bigger than yourself gives you strength you didn't know you had. As I prepared for my next round of treatment, I knew that every small victory in this struggle wasn't just for me or for Reynolds Pharmaceutical. It was for every patient waiting for the treatments we were developing, for every researcher working to make those treatments possible, and for the principle that some things matter more than profit margins. The chemotherapy was taking its toll, but it wasn't just the physical effects that weighed on me. The constant strategic maneuvering, the need to stay one step ahead of Elizabeth's PR campaign, the responsibility of protecting our research projects, it was exhausting on every level. That's when I received an unexpected visitor who would change my perspective entirely. Margaret Chen, Dr. Chen's mother and our former chief research officer, arrived one afternoon between my treatments. She had retired 5 years ago, but her reputation in the pharmaceutical industry remained legendary. She was one of the few people who had worked directly with my grandfather during the company's early days. "I hope you don't mind an old scientist dropping by," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. Her eyes took in the laptops, tablets, and corporate documents spread across my hospital room. "Reminds me of your grandfather's office, always surrounded by papers, always working on 3 things at once." I tried to sit up straighter, suddenly self-conscious about my appearance. Margaret waved away my effort. "Save your strength. I'm here to talk, not to be impressed." She pulled out an old photograph from her bag. "Look at this." The photo showed our original research facility, really just a converted warehouse, from 1965. My grandfather stood in front, surrounded by a small team of scientists. Margaret was there too, barely out of graduate school, beaming with enthusiasm. "Your grandfather faced a crisis similar to this, you know," she said, smoothing the photograph's worn edges. "About 2 years after this picture was taken, a larger pharmaceutical company tried to buy us out. They promised to maintain our research, keep all our projects going. The offer was incredibly generous, would have made your grandfather wealthy overnight." I knew our company's history, but I'd never heard this particular story. "What happened?" Margaret's eyes took on a distant look. "The night before he was supposed to sign the papers, one of our trial patients came to see him. A young mother with a heart condition. She told him how our delivery system had changed her life, let her take care of her children without constantly worrying about medication schedules. She said she trusted Reynolds because we cared about patients more than profits." She paused, making sure I was taking in the significance. "The next day, your grandfather tore up the buyout offer. Said some things weren't for sale. Not our mission, not our integrity, not the trust people placed in us. The parallel to my current situation wasn't lost on me." "But this is different," I protested. "Elizabeth isn't trying to buy us out. She's trying to take over from within, change everything we stand for while keeping the Reynolds name." "Which makes it worse," Margaret said firmly. "At least an outside buyer would have been honest about their intentions. What your sister is doing. She's not just threatening the company's future, she's corrupting its soul." She leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgent tone. "Catherine, you're fighting this the wrong way. You're playing Elizabeth's game, corporate maneuvering, PR, battles, shareholder politics. That's her arena, not yours." "What choice do I have?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "She's turning everyone against me, making me look like an unstable, emotionally compromised leader." Margaret's response surprised me. "Good." "Good?" I echoed, confused. "Yes, good. Let her focus on politics and perception. While she's busy trying to make you look weak, show everyone what true strength looks like. Not the kind that comes from power plays and PR campaigns, but the kind that comes from unwavering commitment to what's right. She pulled out another document from her bag, a research paper from 30 years ago, the first major study proving the effectiveness of our drug delivery system. Your grandfather didn't win people's trust with press releases and shareholder presentations. He won it by solving problems others wouldn't touch, by putting patients first when everyone else put profits first. The paper's pages were yellow with age, but the data was clear. Revolutionary improvements in patient outcomes, dramatically reduced complications, better quality of life scores. This wasn't just corporate success. This was human impact measured in saved lives and reduced suffering. The board members, the shareholders, they're not just looking for a strong leader, Margaret continued. They're looking for someone who understands what Reynolds Pharmaceutical really stands for. Elizabeth can promise them better profits, but you can remind them of why this company exists in the first place. She stood up, placing the old research paper on my bedside table. Your grandfather used to say that in the pharmaceutical industry, you can either make money or make history. The real trick is knowing which one matters more. As she turned to leave, she added one final thought. You know, I've been watching Dr. Chen lead your research division. She reminds me of another young scientist I knew, someone who understood that the most important breakthroughs don't happen in boardrooms, they happen in laboratories and patient rooms. Someone who believed that doing good work was more important than looking good doing it. After Margaret left, I spent hours studying that old research paper, not just for its scientific content, but for what it represented. Each data point, each success metric wasn't just about corporate achievement. It was about lives changed, families helped, suffering reduced. I realized that Margaret was right. I had been so focused on defending against Elizabeth's corporate tactics that I'd lost sight of our most powerful weapon, the fundamental truth of why Reynolds Pharmaceutical existed. Elizabeth could manipulate perceptions and play political games, but she couldn't change the reality of what our work meant to real people. That night, I sent a message to Dr. Chen. I need you to gather something for me, not financial reports or corporate documents. I want patient stories. Every life we've changed, every person we've helped. It's time to remind everyone what we're really fighting for. Her response came quickly. Already on it. And Catherine? Margaret told me about her visit. She's right. Some battles aren't won in the boardroom. They're won in the hearts of people who believe in what you're fighting for. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly clear about my path forward. Elizabeth wanted to make this about corporate power. I would make it about corporate purpose. She was fighting for control of a company. I was fighting for its soul. The morning my latest test results came back showing significant tumor reduction, Elizabeth made her boldest move yet. While I was reviewing my improved blood work with Dr. Martinez, my phone exploded with urgent messages. Elizabeth had called an emergency press conference at Reynolds Pharmaceutical headquarters. She's announcing a major corporate restructuring, Michael reported via video call, his face tense. She's positioning it as a modernization initiative to ensure the company's future in an evolving market. Catherine, she's planning to spin off the research division into a separate entity, one that she would control independently. The implications were staggering. By separating our research division, Elizabeth would effectively gut the heart of Reynolds Pharmaceutical. The main company would retain the profitable existing products, while the spun-off research entity would carry all the risk and cost of new drug development. It was a move designed to please shareholders with immediate profits, while destroying our ability to develop new treatments. Dr. Martinez, who had been checking my vitals, paused. That would affect your autoimmune treatment trials, wouldn't it? It would kill them, I replied, my mind racing. Along with every other long-term research project we have. I reached for my laptop, but my hands were shaking. Not from anger, but from the morning's treatment. Just then, Dr. Chen burst into my hospital room, barely acknowledging the medical staff. They're shutting down the labs, she said, breathless. Security teams are already there, telling researchers to save their data and clear out. They're calling it a temporary safety review, but they're changing the access codes and sealing the facilities. This was it, Elizabeth's nuclear option. By physically shutting down the labs, she could create a fait accompli that would be difficult to reverse, even if the board opposed it. The timing wasn't accidental either. She knew I was scheduled for treatment today, likely assuming I'd be too weak to respond effectively. But Margaret's words rang in my ears. Some battles aren't won in the boardroom. I turned to Dr. Martinez. I need a favor, I said. Something that goes against every bit of medical advice you'd normally give. He studied my face carefully. You want to leave the hospital. Just for a few hours. These treatments are saving my life. But right now there are thousands of other lives hanging in the balance. Those research projects, they're not just corporate assets. They're hope for people who have run out of options. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll give you anti-nausea medication and a portable IV, but you'll need to come back immediately if you experience any severe symptoms. While the medical team prepared me, I made 2 crucial calls. The first was to Linda in legal affairs. Get me everything we have on research facility safety protocols and employee access rights. The second was to our head of security, James Wong, who had worked for Reynolds since my father's time. James, I need to know. Who do you really work for? The interim CEO who signs your checks, or the company's mission? His response was immediate. I've watched you grow up in these halls, Ms. Reynolds. I know what this company stands for. What do you need? Within an hour, I was in a car heading to the research campus, Dr. Chen beside me monitoring my vital signs. We arrived to find the facility in chaos. Researchers stood in the parking lot, some crying, others arguing with security personnel. Equipment was being inventoried for asset evaluation. As my car pulled up, Elizabeth was at the podium set up near the main entrance, cameras rolling as she spoke about difficult but necessary changes and streamlining for efficiency. The sight of me emerging from the car, still attached to my IV drip, caused her to falter mid-sentence. I walked slowly but steadily toward the podium, every step deliberate. The cameras swung toward me and I could hear reporters murmuring. Elizabeth recovered quickly, moving to intercept me. Catherine, she said loudly enough for the microphones to pick up, you should be in the hospital. This is exactly the kind of reckless behavior that concerns us about your judgment. I ignored her, turning instead to face the assembled crowd. Security personnel moved to block me, but James Wong stepped forward. Stand down, he ordered his team. Ms. Reynolds has full facility access. Always has, always will. My name is Catherine Reynolds, I began, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet parking lot. And yes, I am fighting cancer. But that's not the only battle that matters today. I gestured to the researchers standing in the lot. These scientists dedicate their lives to fighting diseases that destroy families and end lives too soon. They work here because Reynolds Pharmaceutical has always put patients before profits. I turned to face the cameras directly. Today, there's an attempt to end that mission, to turn life-saving research into a separate entity that can be quietly shut down in the name of profitability. I stand here, receiving treatment that might save my life, while decisions are being made that could deny that same hope to countless others. Elizabeth tried to interject, but I continued, my voice growing stronger. So yes, I left my hospital bed to be here, because some things are worth fighting for, even when you're at your weakest. Some principles matter more than personal comfort. And some battles must be fought not in boardrooms, but in front of those who deserve to know the truth. Dr. Chen stepped forward then, holding up her tablet. The autoimmune treatment trial results, she announced, released to every major medical journal 10 minutes ago. along with documentation of how recent management decisions have delayed potentially life-saving treatments. Elizabeth's face went pale. This wasn't a corporate power play anymore. This was the truth, exposed in the full light of day, with cameras rolling and witnesses watching. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against manipulation isn't counter-manipulation, it's simple, unvarnished honesty. The media explosion that followed my appearance at the research facility was unprecedented in Reynolds Pharmaceuticals' history. As I recovered back in my hospital room that evening, every major news outlet was running the story. But they weren't focusing on corporate power struggles or leadership conflicts. Instead, they were telling the story I had wanted them to tell all along, the story of what was really at stake. Pharmaceutical company at crossroads, profits versus patients, read one headline. Another declared, Reynolds Pharmaceutical Research, division under threat. Thousands of trial patients face uncertainty. Medical journals were publishing detailed analyses of our research pipeline, highlighting the potential impacts of the proposed restructuring on drug development. Elizabeth's PR team was working overtime to control the narrative, but they were fighting a losing battle. The image of me standing there, IV drip in hand, defending our researchers and their work, had struck a chord that no corporate press release could match. But more importantly, people were finally talking about what mattered. The patients, the research, the fundamental mission of the company. Dr. Chen visited me the next morning, bringing surprising news. The research team did something remarkable, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. They've been working through the night, not packing up their labs as ordered, but documenting everything. Every project, every trial, every potential breakthrough. They're calling it the Legacy Archive. She showed me the database they'd created. It wasn't just clinical data and research protocols. The scientists had included personal statements about why they chose to work at Reynolds, stories about patients whose lives had been changed by our treatments and their hopes for future breakthroughs. It was a testament to what our company truly stood for. There's more, she continued. Other pharmaceutical companies are reaching out, not with corporate takeover offers, but with support for our research mission. 3 major research institutions have offered to partner with us, specifically citing our commitment to prioritizing patient care over quick profits. This was the kind of momentum Elizabeth hadn't anticipated. She had expected a corporate battle fought with lawyers and PR firms. Instead, she was facing a groundswell of support for the very principles she had tried to dismiss as outdated and impractical. My phone buzzed with a message from David Kim, the young researcher who had spoken about the 12-year-old patient in our autoimmune trial. He had attached a video. The girl's parents had recorded a statement about what our treatment had meant for their daughter. This is why we do what we do, his message read. This is what they can't put a price on. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Dr. James Williams, our longest-serving board member, came to visit me. He looked tired, but determined. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. About your grandfather, about what he built, about why he chose this path. He pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. Found this in my office archives, notes from board meetings in the early days. Your grandfather wrote something interesting here, during a discussion about taking the company public. He read aloud. The moment we let market pressures override our mission, we become just another company. Our value isn't in our stock price, it's in the lives we change. Dr. Williams looked up at me. You know, when Elizabeth started pushing for these changes, she made some compelling arguments about market realities and shareholder value. But watching you stand up for our research team yesterday, that reminded me of what really matters. He stood up, straightening his jacket. The board is meeting tomorrow. Elizabeth doesn't know it yet, but several of us have been talking. Your grandfather's notes here, they're going to be relevant. That evening, as the nurses changed my IV bags, I received another surprise visitor. Janet Martinez, Dr. Martinez's wife, and our head of human resources. She had worked at Reynolds since the company first went public. "You've started something," she said, smiling as she sat down. "It's not just about saving the research division anymore. People throughout the company are speaking up, sharing stories about why they chose to work here, what the mission means to them. Even in departments like accounting and IT, they're proud to be part of something that puts purpose before profit." She showed me her phone, where employees had started a private social media group called Reynolds Legacy. It was filled with posts from staff at all levels sharing their experiences and reaffirming their commitment to the company's original mission. "You know what the interesting thing is?" Janet continued. "Nobody's talking about stock prices or market share. They're talking about purpose, about making a difference." Elizabeth tried to paint that kind of thinking as naive and outdated, but it turns out it's what makes people want to come to work every morning. As I lay there that night, watching the medication drip steadily through my IV line, I thought about transformation, not just of cells and bodies, but of perspectives and priorities. My illness had forced me to face my own mortality, to think deeply about what really matters. Perhaps that was exactly what the company needed too, a moment to confront its own identity, to remember its core purpose. My phone lit up with another message, this time from Michael. "Major shareholders calling. They've seen the research impact reports. They're asking questions about long-term value versus short-term profits. Elizabeth's not going to like their conclusions." I smiled, remembering Margaret's words about letting Elizabeth focus on politics while we focused on purpose. Sometimes the strongest position isn't the most aggressive one. It's simply standing firmly in your truth and letting that truth speak for itself. Elizabeth's response to the growing support for our research division came the next morning, and it was more ruthless than anything I had anticipated. She called an emergency press conference, but this time, she brought out her ultimate weapon: our parents. I watched from my hospital room as our father, William Reynolds, stood beside Elizabeth at the podium. He looked older than I remembered, his face drawn with what appeared to be concern. "As the former CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceutical," he began, his voice heavy, "and more importantly, as a father, I feel compelled to speak out. Catherine's illness has clearly affected her judgment more severely than we initially feared." Mother stood on his other side, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The staging was perfect: the worried parents, the responsible sister trying to protect both the company and her unwell sibling. Elizabeth had orchestrated every detail, down to the family photos displayed behind them showing happier times. "Yesterday's incident at the research facility demonstrated exactly why these changes are necessary," Elizabeth added, her voice carrying just the right note of pained concern. "My sister left her hospital bed, endangering her health, to make unfounded accusations. This isn't just about corporate governance anymore. It's about protecting Catherine from herself." The betrayal cut deep, but not as deep as what came next. Elizabeth revealed that she had filed for temporary guardianship over my affairs, citing medical incapacity. She had testimony from psychiatric experts who had never met me, claiming that the combination of high-dose chemotherapy and the stress of corporate responsibility had rendered me unfit to make decisions. My phone started ringing immediately. First Linda from Legal Affairs. "This is a serious threat, Catherine. If she gets guardianship, she could force you to step down permanently." Then Michael. "The shareholders are spooked. They're worried about the implications of a family legal battle." But it was Dr. Martinez who provided the most crucial perspective. He arrived shortly after the press conference carrying a thick file. "I thought this might happen," he said grimly. "That's why I've been documenting everything. Every test result, every cognitive assessment, every demonstration of your clear decision-making capacity. Elizabeth's experts have never examined you. My records will carry more weight." As we discussed strategy, an unexpected ally emerged. James Wong, our head of security, sent a secure message. Ms. Reynolds, our surveillance team routinely records all meetings in corporate facilities for security purposes, including private conversations in the executive conference rooms. Elizabeth may have forgotten this policy, or assumed I would delete certain recordings. The implications were clear. Elizabeth's careful public performance of concerned sister and responsible executive might not match what she had said behind closed doors. "How quickly can you compile those recordings?" I asked. "Already done," came the reply. "Including a particularly interesting conversation from last week about using your illness as the perfect opportunity to finally take control." I thought carefully about my next move. Elizabeth had escalated this to a deeply personal level, using our parents and my illness as weapons. The easy response would be to fight fire with fire, release the recordings, expose her private statements, fight the guardianship with everything we had. But then I remembered something else our grandfather had written in those old board meeting notes Dr. Williams had shown me. In times of crisis, look for the path that makes you proud, not just of what you achieve, but how you achieve it. I called an emergency meeting of my own, but not with lawyers or PR teams. Instead, I asked Dr. Chen to bring her research team to my hospital room. We set up video conferencing so everyone could participate, including those still working in the labs. "Elizabeth has made this personal," I told them. "She's using my illness and our family dynamics to distract from the real issue. But we're not going to play that game. Instead, we're going to show everyone exactly what's at stake." Over the next several hours, we worked together to prepare something unprecedented in corporate history. We would open our research labs to the public, not just through press releases and carefully curated tours, but through real, unfiltered access. We would show the world exactly what happens in a pharmaceutical research facility dedicated to putting patients first. Dr. Chen's team began compiling video diaries from patients in our trials. Researchers prepared presentations explaining their work in terms anyone could understand. We even set up live feeds from some of our labs, letting people see the actual day-to-day work of developing life-saving treatments. "Elizabeth wants to make this about family drama," I told them. "Let's make it about something bigger. Let's show everyone what we're really fighting for." The response from the research team was overwhelming. Scientists who usually preferred to stay in the background volunteered to speak publicly about their work. Lab technicians shared stories about breakthroughs they'd witnessed. Even the maintenance staff wanted to participate, talking about what it meant to be part of a company dedicated to saving lives. As we finalized our plans, Dr. Martinez came in for my evening checkup. Looking at all the activity in my room, he smiled. "You know," he said, checking my vital signs, "sometimes the best treatment for what ails us isn't in these medical bags. Sometimes it's in remembering what we're fighting for and knowing we're not fighting alone." I looked around at the dedicated faces of our research team, both in person and on screens, all united in purpose. Elizabeth had tried to isolate me, to paint me as a sick, unstable person making irrational decisions. Instead, she had helped create exactly what our company needed: a renewed sense of community and shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, including the guardianship hearing and board meetings that could determine the company's future. But tonight, watching our team work together to protect something bigger than any individual, I felt stronger than I had since my diagnosis. Sometimes the best way to fight isn't by tearing others down, but by building something so powerful that it speaks for itself. The morning of the combined board meeting and guardianship hearing arrived with an unexpected development. As I was preparing to leave the hospital, against medical advice but with Dr. Martinez's reluctant support, news broke that our autoimmune treatment trial had achieved a breakthrough. A patient who had been wheelchair-bound for 5 years had begun walking independently. Dr. Chen rushed into my room with the data. "It's not just one patient," she said. her eyes bright with excitement. "We're seeing similar improvements across the trial group. The long-term approach you insisted on, the one Elizabeth wanted to abandon for quick profits, it's working. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, but there was no time to celebrate. Today would determine not just my future, but the future of everything we had built." Elizabeth had arranged for the guardianship hearing to take place first, clearly hoping to have me declared incompetent before the board could meet. The hospital's conference room had been converted into a makeshift courtroom to accommodate my medical needs. Elizabeth arrived with our parents and a team of lawyers, all wearing expressions of carefully crafted concern. She had even brought a wheelchair, though I hadn't needed one in weeks. "Catherine," she said softly, loud enough for others to hear, "please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're only trying to help you focus on your recovery." I stood straight, wearing a suit for the first time since my diagnosis. "That's interesting, Elizabeth, because I have someone here who wants to talk about my recovery." I nodded to Dr. Martinez, who stepped forward with my medical files. For the next hour, he methodically demolished every claim Elizabeth's experts had made about my mental state. He presented test results, cognitive assessments, and detailed documentation of my decision-making capacity throughout treatment. "In my professional opinion," he concluded, "Ms. Reynolds has demonstrated not just competence, but exceptional clarity of purpose during her treatment." Elizabeth's lawyers tried to argue that my appearance at the research facility proved I was making irrational decisions. That's when James Wong played his hand, presenting the security recordings. Elizabeth's voice filled the room. "This illness is perfect timing. Once we have guardianship, we can push through the restructuring without any interference. She'll be too weak to fight back." The color drained from Elizabeth's face. Our mother gasped. But I wasn't done. "I'd like to call another witness," I said. "Someone who can speak to the consequences of the decisions I've been making." The door opened, and a young woman walked in slowly but steadily. It was Sarah Collins, one of our trial patients. Just 3 months ago, she had been unable to walk across a room. Now she stood before the hearing, living proof of what our research meant. "2 years ago, I lost everything to my condition," Sarah testified. "My job, my independence, my hope. Every major pharmaceutical company had abandoned research into treatments like this because the profit margins weren't high enough. But Reynolds Pharmaceutical, under Catherine's leadership, didn't give up on patients like me." Elizabeth tried to interrupt, but Sarah continued. "Yesterday, I walked my daughter to school for the first time in 3 years. That happened because Catherine Reynolds chose to prioritize patient care over quick profits. If that's what you call impaired judgment, then maybe we need more of it in this industry." The judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. Not only was the guardianship petition denied, but he issued a strong rebuke to Elizabeth for what he called a transparent attempt to use medical proceedings for corporate advantage. But the real battle was still to come. The board meeting was scheduled for the afternoon, and Elizabeth had one last card to play. She had spent months cultivating relationships with key shareholders, promising them increased profits through her modernization plan. As we moved to the boardroom, I could see the conflict in the board members' faces. They had a fiduciary duty to consider shareholder interests, and Elizabeth's plan offered clear short-term profits. What I was offering, commitment to research, prioritizing patient care, was harder to quantify on a quarterly earnings report. That's when I unveiled our final move. "Before we vote on the company's future," I announced, "I want you to see something." The large screens in the boardroom came to life, showing live feeds from our research facilities, not just the labs, but the patient treatment rooms, the testing facilities, every aspect of our work. For the past 24 hours, we've been broadcasting these feeds publicly, I explained. Over 2 million people have watched our scientists at work. They've seen what pharmaceutical research really looks like when it's driven by purpose rather than just profit. Dr. Chen stepped forward with the latest trial results. This morning's breakthrough isn't just a medical achievement, she said. It's validation of our approach. The longer development timeline that some called inefficient, it gave us insights that led to today's success. Elizabeth stood, her composure cracking for the first time. This is emotional manipulation, she snapped. We're running a business, not a charity. The shareholders are right here, interrupted Robert Nash, our largest institutional investor. And we've been watching too. My analysts have been running the numbers. You know what they found? Companies that maintain strong research commitments consistently outperform those that chase short-term profits through restructuring. It's not just about ethics. It's about sustainable business practice. The vote that followed wasn't even close. The board not only rejected Elizabeth's restructuring plan, but passed a resolution affirming the company's commitment to its research mission. Elizabeth stormed out before the final tally was even announced, our parents trailing behind her. As the boardroom cleared, Dr. Williams stayed behind. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. Not just of what you protected, but how you protected it. You fought for the company's soul without losing your own. I looked at the screen still showing our research teams at work. We won because we remembered what we're really fighting for, I replied. And because sometimes, the best way to defeat darkness is simply to turn on the lights. The days following the board meeting brought a whirlwind of changes. Elizabeth's resignation letter arrived the next morning, a tersely worded document that blamed philosophical differences about corporate direction for her departure. She had already cleared out her office overnight, leaving behind only a framed photo of our grandfather that had hung there since the company's early days. The photo caught my attention as I stood in her empty office. It showed him standing in front of our first research facility, his expression determined and hopeful. I remembered how Elizabeth used to point to that photo during investor presentations, talking about our proud family legacy. Now I understood that she had seen it only as a tool for manipulation, while I had always viewed it as a reminder of our true purpose. The media coverage shifted dramatically. Reynolds Pharmaceutical recommits to research mission, declared the Wall Street Journal. Victory for patient-focused pharma, headlined the Industry Daily. But the most meaningful response came from within the company itself. Dr. Chen organized an impromptu gathering in the main research lab, where teams had been working around the clock to document the breakthrough in our autoimmune treatment. As I walked in, still moving slowly but steadier each day, the entire room broke into spontaneous applause. We've had 17 researchers turn down offers from other companies this week, she told me, beaming, including 3 who had previously accepted positions elsewhere. They're calling it the Reynolds Revival, a return to what pharmaceutical research should be about. Michael Torres arrived with more surprising news. Our stock price, which Elizabeth had warned would plummet if her modernization plan failed, was actually rising. The market's responding to stability and clear direction, he explained. Your commitment to research integrity isn't just good ethics, it's good business. Long-term investors are increasing their positions. The board called an emergency session to address the leadership transition. I expected them to appoint an interim CEO while I completed my treatment, but Dr. Williams had other ideas. We've seen what happens when we separate leadership from our core mission, he said. The board proposes a new leadership structure. You remain CEO, but with expanded authority for your management team during your recovery. It was a vote of confidence not just in me, but in the entire team that had fought to protect our company's purpose. Dr. Chen would oversee research operations, Michael would handle financial decisions, and Linda would manage legal affairs. Each of them had proven their commitment to our mission during the crisis. The most difficult moment came later that week when our parents requested a meeting. They arrived at my office looking uncomfortable, nothing like the confident figures who had stood beside Elizabeth at her press conference. Mother kept wringing her hands, and Father couldn't quite meet my eyes. "We got it wrong," Father said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Elizabeth. She had a way of making her arguments sound so reasonable. Modernization, market realities, shareholder value. It all seemed to make sense when she explained it. "She's your daughter too," Mother added softly. "We thought we were protecting you both. Her from what we saw as rigid thinking about the company's direction, you from the stress of conflict during your illness." I looked at them, these people who had raised us, who had watched our grandfather build something remarkable, who had somehow lost sight of what made it remarkable. "Do you remember," I asked, "what grandfather used to say about why he started this company?" Father nodded slowly. "Because no one else would make the medicines his patients needed." Exactly. He didn't start Reynolds Pharmaceutical to maximize shareholder value or chase quarterly profits. He did it because he saw people suffering and knew he could help. Everything else, the success, the growth, the profits, came because we never lost sight of that purpose. The conversation that followed was long and sometimes painful, but necessary. We talked about the past, about choices made and paths taken, about how Elizabeth had gradually shifted from viewing the company as a force for good to seeing it as a tool for personal advancement, about how success could be measured in different ways. As they were leaving, Father paused at the door. "Your grandfather's original research notes are in the family vault," he said. I think it's time they were back in the company archives where they belong, where people can remember why we do what we do." That evening, as I reviewed the latest trial results from my office, I had insisted on returning to work. Part-time despite Dr. Martinez's protests, I received an unexpected email. It was from a young researcher in our lab, someone I didn't know personally. "Ms. Reynolds," it read, "I wanted to share something with you. Today, I was explaining to my daughter what I do for work. When I told her I help make medicines that make sick people better, she said she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. Thanks to you, I knew I was telling her the truth about what we do here. Some companies make medicines to make money. We make money to make medicines. Thank you for reminding us of the difference." I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The battle had been won, but more importantly, the reason for fighting it had been reaffirmed. We hadn't just preserved a company. We had protected a purpose, a mission that mattered more than profit margins and market shares. 3 months after the board meeting that changed everything, I sat in Dr. Martinez's office receiving news that would mark another turning point. My latest scans showed complete remission. The battle that had started this whole journey, my personal fight against cancer, had been won. "Your response to treatment has been remarkable," Dr. Martinez said, smiling as he showed me the clear scans. "Though I have to say, your definition of taking it easy during recovery was rather unique." I thought about everything that had happened during my treatment. Fighting cancer had taught me that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes your greatest victories come when you feel most vulnerable. The parallel with saving Reynolds Pharmaceutical wasn't lost on me. The company had undergone its own kind of healing. The day I returned to work full-time, I found the research campus transformed. Gone was the atmosphere of uncertainty and fear that Elizabeth's plans had created. Instead, there was a renewed sense of purpose and innovation. Dr. Chen had implemented what she called the Legacy Initiative, a program that connected our researchers directly with the patients their work affected. Scientists who usually saw only lab results and data points now regularly met with people whose lives had been changed by our medications. "It keeps us focused on what matters," she explained during our morning meeting. "Yesterday, we had a mother thank our cardiovascular team. Her daughter can play soccer now because of our new blood pressure medication. You should have seen our researchers' faces. I don't think quarterly profit reports ever generated that kind of motivation." The changes weren't just emotional. They were showing measurable results. Our research productivity had increased significantly. Teams were collaborating, more effectively sharing insights across departments. The transparency we had shown during the crisis had evolved into a new corporate culture of openness and shared purpose. Michael Torres brought me the latest financial reports with a knowing smile. "Remember how Elizabeth claimed our research-focused approach would drive away investors?" he asked. "Take a look at these numbers." The data was clear. Our stock price had not only stabilized, but was showing steady growth. More importantly, we were attracting a different kind of investor, ones who understood the value of long-term research commitment over quick profits. "We're getting interesting partnership proposals too," he continued. 3 major research universities want to collaborate on clinical trials. They specifically cited our commitment to prioritizing patient outcomes over short-term financial gains. Linda from Legal Affairs had restructured our patents and licensing agreements to reflect our values. Instead of maximizing short-term profits, we developed tiered pricing systems that made our medications more accessible while still funding future research. "It's actually reducing our legal expenses," she reported. When you're transparent about pricing and genuinely focused on patient access, you face fewer challenges and controversies. Some of our competitors are starting to follow our model. The most profound changes were happening at the ground level. Our recruitment team reported a surge in applications from top researchers and scientists. "They're calling it the Reynolds way," the HR director told me. "Young researchers want to work somewhere that values scientific integrity over market pressures." One morning, I found a letter on my desk that brought tears to my eyes. It was from Sarah Collins, the trial patient, who had testified at my guardianship hearing. She had enclosed a photo of herself hiking with her daughter. "6 months ago, I couldn't walk across my living room," she wrote. "Yesterday, I climbed a mountain with my child. The researchers here didn't just develop a treatment, they gave me my life back. Thank you for fighting to protect the work they do." I kept that letter on my desk as a reminder of what we were really fighting for. It proved especially valuable during challenging moments, like when shareholders would pressure us about increasing profit margins or when competitors would launch aggressive marketing campaigns. The industry began to take notice. Other pharmaceutical companies started examining their own research priorities. Trade publications wrote articles about the Reynolds Renaissance and its impact on industry practices. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source. A young intern stopped me in the hallway one day. "Ms. Reynolds," she said hesitantly, "I wanted to thank you. I was an undergraduate when everything happened with your sister. Our business ethics class actually studied your case, how you chose purpose over profit, mission over money. It's why I wanted to intern here." She paused, then added something that stuck with me. "Everyone talks about having to choose between doing good and doing well. You showed that when you stay true to a worthy mission, success follows naturally." Even my relationship with research had evolved. I found myself spending more time in the labs, not just reviewing reports, but understanding the work firsthand. The scientists no longer saw me as just a CEO, but as someone who genuinely understood and supported their mission. Dr. Chen joked that I had become the company's chief purpose officer as well as its CEO. "You're not just managing a company," she said. "You're guarding a legacy, not the kind that's measured in stock prices, but in lives changed and hope restored." The lessons from our struggle had become part of our corporate DNA. We had learned that true strength isn't about dominating others, but about staying true to your principles. That success isn't just about financial metrics, but about the impact you have on people's lives. As I looked out my office window at the research campus below, I saw more than buildings and laboratories. I saw my grandfather's vision not just preserved but enhanced. We had proven that compassion and commerce could coexist, that doing good could be good business. The real impact of our stand for research integrity became clear 6 months after Elizabeth's departure. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Dr. Chen burst into my office, waving a scientific journal. "You need to see this," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. The article was titled, "The Reynolds Effect: How One Company's Stand Changed Pharmaceutical Research." It detailed how our public commitment to prioritizing patient outcomes over quick profits had sparked an industry-wide reassessment of research priorities. "It's not just the article," Dr. Chen continued. "Look at what's happening across the industry." She pulled up a series of news reports on her tablet. 3 major pharmaceutical companies had recently announced increased funding for rare disease research. 2 others had established patient advocacy councils to guide research priorities. "They're calling it ethical competition," she explained. "Companies are actually competing to show who can make the biggest positive impact on patient care. And it all started with us standing our ground." The validation of our approach came from an unexpected source. A consortium of medical research universities released a study comparing pharmaceutical companies' research effectiveness. Reynolds Pharmaceutical hadn't just maintained its research productivity during my illness and the subsequent power struggle. We had actually increased it. "The data shows something fascinating," Michael Torres said during our executive meeting. "Companies that prioritize long-term research over short-term profits don't just develop better medications, they're also more financially stable. We're becoming a case study in sustainable pharmaceutical development." But with increased visibility came new challenges. Other companies began headhunting our researchers, offering substantial salaries and bonuses. Investment firms pressured us to patent and monetize our research processes. Everyone wanted to replicate our success, but many were missing the fundamental principle that made it work. I addressed these challenges during an industry conference, my first major public speaking engagement since my recovery. "The Reynolds effect isn't about a specific business strategy," I explained to the packed auditorium. "It's about remembering why we exist as an industry. When you prioritize patient outcomes, everything else, innovation, talent retention, financial success, follows naturally." The speech was well received, but the real breakthrough came during the Q&A session. A young researcher stood up and shared how her team had been ready to abandon a promising but challenging project until they heard about our story. "You showed us that it's possible to do meaningful work without compromising our principles," she said. "Now we're 6 months away from clinical trials. Our influence extended beyond research practices. Linda from Legal Affairs had developed a new framework for ethical drug pricing that was gaining traction industry-wide. We're proving that accessibility and profitability aren't mutually exclusive," she reported. 7 other companies have adopted similar models. The human impact of our work became increasingly visible. Dr. Chen established a program where researchers regularly met with patients who had benefited from our medications. These meetings weren't just feel-good exercises, they were driving innovation. "Last week, a patient mentioned having trouble remembering to take multiple medications," a researcher told me. "It reminded me of your grandfather's original inspiration for our delivery system. Now we're developing a new version specifically designed for patients with memory issues." Even our corporate culture was being studied and emulated. Harvard Business School published a case study about our transparent research practices and ethical decision-making processes. Business magazines wrote articles about the Reynolds way of balancing profit and purpose. But the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. One morning, I received a letter from a small biotech startup. They had been developing a promising treatment for a rare genetic disorder, but were struggling to find funding because the potential market was too small. "Your stand against prioritizing market size over medical need gave us courage," the letter read. "We showed potential investors how Reynolds Pharmaceutical proved that focusing on patient needs can be commercially viable. Yesterday, we secured full funding for our clinical trials." This ripple effect throughout the industry proved what I had always believed, that one company's commitment to doing the right thing could inspire others to follow suit. We weren't just changing our company, we were helping to reshape the entire pharmaceutical industry's approach to research and development. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Some shareholders still pushed for quicker returns. Competitors sometimes tried to undercut our pricing models. But we had learned that staying true to your principles isn't always the easiest path, but it's the one that lets you sleep at night. Dr. Martinez, who had supported me through both my medical and corporate battles, summed it up perfectly during one of my follow-up appointments. "You know," he said, checking my now clear scans, "in medicine, we talk about not just treating symptoms but curing the underlying cause. What you've done at Reynolds, it's like treating a systemic problem in the pharmaceutical industry. And, just like in medicine, real healing takes time, but the results last." Looking out over our research campus, watching scientists and researchers going about their work with purpose and pride, I thought about how our story had evolved. What had started as a personal battle against both illness and corporate takeover had become something much larger, a movement toward a more ethical, patient-focused pharmaceutical industry. The Reynolds effect wasn't just about our company anymore. It had become a symbol of the possibility that businesses could do well by doing good, that profit and purpose could coexist, and that standing up for what's right could create positive change far beyond your own organization. 1 year after my final chemotherapy treatment, I organized a different kind of board meeting. Instead of gathering in our corporate conference room, we met in the company's original research facility, my grandfather's converted garage, which we had preserved as a museum of sorts. The space was cramped compared to our modern facilities, but it held something invaluable, reminders of where we came from and why we started. Old laboratory equipment lined the walls, along with framed newspaper clippings documenting our early breakthroughs. My grandfather's original workbench stood in the corner, his handwritten notes still preserved under glass. "I wanted us to meet here," I told the assembled board members, "because we're at a crucial moment in our company's evolution. The crisis we weathered taught us something important about who we are and what we stand for. Now it's time to ensure those lessons become permanent." Dr. Williams, who had known my grandfather, nodded in understanding. "It's about institutionalizing the principles we fought to protect," he said, running his hand along the old workbench, "making sure that what we learned becomes part of our corporate DNA." Over the next few hours, we worked on what would become the Reynolds Principles, a formal codification of our commitment to putting patient care first. But this wasn't just another corporate mission statement destined to gather dust on a wall. We were creating concrete policies and procedures that would protect our research-focused approach for generations to come. Linda from Legal Affairs had drafted new corporate bylaws that would make it harder for future leaders to prioritize short-term profits over research integrity. "We're essentially building guardrails," she explained. "Future boards and executives will have the flexibility to adapt to changing times, but they can't abandon our core principles without extraordinary justification." Dr. Chen presented a revolutionary new research framework that integrated patient advocacy at every level of drug development. "We're not just developing treatments for patients anymore," she said. "We're developing them with patients. Their voices, their experiences, their needs, they're all part of the process from day one." The changes weren't just structural, they were cultural. We had launched a mentorship program pairing veteran researchers with new hires, ensuring that our values and approach would be passed down through generations of scientists. Every new employee spent their first week learning not just about their job, but about our history and mission. Michael Torres had developed a new financial reporting system that measured success not just in profits and market share, but in patient outcomes and research progress. "We're redefining what success looks like in the pharmaceutical industry," he explained. "Other companies are starting to adopt similar metrics." As we worked, I noticed something remarkable. The board members weren't just approving these changes, they were enthusiastically contributing to them. These were experienced business leaders who had seen every corporate trend come and go, yet here they were, genuinely excited about building something meaningful and lasting. During a break, I stepped outside for some air and found James Wong, our head of security, standing by the old garage door. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I first started here, your grandfather used to come back to this building every Friday afternoon. Said it helped him remember what really mattered." His words struck a chord. In the midst of all our forward-looking planning, we needed to remember that our strength came from staying connected to our roots. I decided to reinstate that tradition, not just for myself, but for our entire leadership team. The healing process wasn't just organizational, it was personal too. My parents had been gradually rebuilding their relationship with the company, this time with a better understanding of its true purpose. Father had started sharing stories about the early days, helping us document important parts of our history that might otherwise have been lost. Elizabeth's absence was still felt, but differently now. Rather than a source of tension, it had become a reminder of what happens when you lose sight of your purpose. Some of our best training sessions for new executives included analyzing the choices that led to our crisis, ensuring that future leaders would understand the importance of staying true to our mission. The most profound healing came from unexpected places. Sarah Collins, the patient who had testified during my guardianship hearing, now led our patient advisory council. Her experience, both with our treatment and with the corporate battle that had threatened it, made her a powerful advocate for maintaining our research focus. "You know what the real breakthrough was?" she said during one council meeting. "It wasn't just the treatment that helped me walk again. It was seeing a company choose to do the right thing even when it was hard. That gave me hope, not just in medicine, but in human nature." Our researchers had found their own form of healing through renewed purpose. The fear and uncertainty that had pervaded the labs during Elizabeth's attempted takeover had been replaced by enthusiasm and innovation. Teams that had once worked in silos now collaborated freely, sharing insights and celebrating each other's breakthroughs. One young scientist summed it up perfectly during a lab tour. "In most companies, you're told to think outside the box. Here, we're encouraged to remember why the box was built in the first place, to help people. That clarity of purpose makes all the difference." The healing extended to how we handled challenges. When faced with difficult decisions, we no longer asked just what will make us more profitable, but what would best serve our mission. This approach didn't make the challenges disappear, but it made them clearer to navigate. As the day's meeting concluded, Dr. Williams picked up one of my grandfather's old notebooks. "You know," he said, "your grandfather once told me that the true test of leadership isn't how you handle success. It's how you learn from adversity." This past year, Reynolds Pharmaceutical didn't just survive a crisis. It turned that crisis into an opportunity to become something better. Looking around at the old garage where it all began, I realized that sometimes healing isn't about getting back to what you were before. Sometimes it's about becoming something stronger, clearer, and more purposeful than you ever were. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.